Hello, and welcome to our webinar on supply chain resiliency. I'm Carolyn Lowell with Bone Zone, and joining me today is a panel of orthopedic executives who are well versed in critically thinking through how to handle supply chain disruptions. Many of you watching likely have firsthand experience on just how pervasive supply chain obstacles have been in recent years. Companies face capacity fluctuations, material shortages, labor hurdles, and the list continues from there. And in this webinar, you are going to hear from players in the industry about how they are building agile supply chains in order to maintain profitability and to plan for future company growth. Our goal is in the next 45 minutes or so that you're going to walk away with insight and ideas on how to make your supply chains and your people more resilient in the face of adversity. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to introduce our speakers and to introduce our sponsor. The sponsor of this webinar is Orchid Orthopedic Solutions. Orchid is a leader in manufacturing solutions for the orthopedic market. The company offers the broadest portfolio in the industry, ranging from additive manufacturing to forging, casting, coatings, and packaging. Orchid specializes in implants across the orthopedic spectrum and really provides companies an end-to-end solution for all steps in the supply chain. So thank you, Orchid. We really appreciate your sponsorship of what is an important and critical industry topic. I would now like our panel to join me on screen. I'm going to introduce them. Thank you. Our moderator is Howard Levy. Howard serves as Vice President of Global Sourcing at Zimmer Biomet. Howard has 30 plus years of global strategic sourcing experience, and he is accountable for Zimmer Biomet's direct and indirect sourcing, including global sites in America, Europe, and Asia. Joining Howard are three panelists. Scott Schenkel is Vice President of Operations at Microport Orthopedics. Scott was previously Senior Director of Global Quality at Wright Medical, and he held multiple quality and operations roles at Wright Medical for 15 years prior to Microport acquiring the company. Rounding out our OEM perspective is Tatiana Landano, who is Senior Director of Integrated Business Planning and Strategic Sourcing at ExactTech. Tatiana joined ExactTech in 2022. And prior to her current role, she worked for over 20 years at Biomet, Zimmer Biomet, and ZimV in supply chain. And providing a contract manufacturing perspective today is Ingo Riedel, Vice President of Supply Chain at Orchid. Ingo joined Orchid in 2021. He brings 30 years of medical device experience working in Germany, Asia, and the US. And he previously worked at B. Braun Askelabb, Integra Life Sciences, ConMed, and Viance. So the four of them clearly bring a wealth of perspective and expertise to the conversation. As I mentioned, they're going to talk for about 35 minutes or so. If you would like to participate in Q&A, you're welcome to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to send them a question, and they will do Q&A after they do their opening discussion. So Howard, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Carolyn, and welcome to everybody who's joining us, today for this panel discussion that we're going to have. How to build resilient supply chains designed for profitability and growth is probably something we could spend the whole day on. And as Carolyn mentioned, I've been in the sourcing supply chain world for over 30 years, and I would still say, we've seen some really unprecedented levels of supply chain challenges across our industry. And so I think this is a good opportunity to hear from leading experts today and leading different perspectives as well in that regard. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off here with Tatiana, and maybe just to give context to some of those challenges, Tatiana, what are the biggest challenges you're facing today at ExactTech?
Good morning, Howard, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bone Zone, for inviting me to be here. So I would say today, one of the biggest challenges is to balance supply and demand, to find capacity both internally and externally in terms of equipment, labor, to respond to the high demand that we are experiencing. So to keep up with the growth, that's our biggest challenge today.
Okay, thanks. Ingo?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here and speak to supply chain matters. Our challenge is really finding the right talent, improving our planning, which gets more and more critical, especially with the market changes we see, even going procedures out of a hospital into an ambulance surgery center. So there is some unknowns where we think planning is a main focus for us. We do have, like everyone else, probably global supply chain constraints with key or in key commodities, which we have a couple of programs around to leverage and work on it.
Thanks, Ingo. Scott?
Yeah, so thanks, Howard. And again, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. And I'm flattered by the expert comment, but I feel, I'll tell you that these challenges are pretty rough. I certainly don't feel like an expert, but maybe somebody can learn, just learn from all of the mistakes that I've experienced and see what to do better. Some of our biggest challenges right now, just like Tatiana and Ingo said, it's all about external factors and internal factors. External factors is just getting the supplies that we need. And that can include human resources, capacity in our plant, but also the internal factors. It's really about planning and making sure that we're operating that function with precision, to just limit the amount of self-inflicted wounds that we have in the supply chain. In this environment, there's so many things going on externally. We manage through those the best as we can, and then again, just try to limit what the things that we're doing that exacerbate the situation.
Yeah, it's interesting perspective, because a lot of times as we think about some of these issues, some of it's more focused on a particular supplier potentially. But I think everyone has this kind of theme too of how do we internally plan better? How do we work perhaps with the commercial organization better in a sales and operations planning kind of approach? How do we work with the finance team on the needed CapEx investments and making sure they're prioritized and funded either internally or in conjunction with our suppliers? So it's interesting to hear the big emphasis that it's not just a particular category or commodity, although, there still are challenges there. It's interesting to hear that. It's not all doom and gloom though, right? As we looked at last year, I think, I kind of used the word unprecedented challenges last year. And as we get into this year, there's still some big challenges out there, but I think the word unprecedented maybe doesn't apply once you're into something for 18 months or whatever we've been. So with that in mind, Scott, as you look at it, which challenges are getting better over the past year as you see it from the MicroPort vantage point?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, look both internally and externally. Internally, we've I think, and I suspect a lot of folks have experienced this, just the situation has exposed all of the chinks in the armor of the internal processes related to planning and supply chain. And, I think we've recognized a lot of those and are, have actions well underway to get those improved. And we're personally, from a MicroPort perspective, we're seeing benefits from that every day. And then there are, supply areas that many of us share, that we can see some light at the end of the tunnel there. With some of the big contract manufacturers that a lot of us rely on, whether it's for packaging or metal components. I think it seems like without having visibility to some of the elements that Ingo might have. It seems like a lot of those organizations have gone through the same sort of internal improvements that we've gotten, because some of those just kind of outside of our OEM control seem to be getting a little bit better, and it's on all fronts. Again, the components that we buy, packaging materials, and then there's a few suppliers that many of us in orthopedic share, and we definitely see the collaboration and communication improving, as well as the end result, which is the ability to get the products to the customers.
Thanks, Scott. Ingo, what about from your perspective? What do you see as far as getting better, as far as the challenges over the past year or so?
Yeah, first I want to agree to what Scott said 100%. I mean, and Scott, to answer your question, yes, we are in this together. We are not that much different than what you experience, obviously, because we have the same supply chain process like you have as an OEM, right? And I think I can speak to it. I have been on the OEM side for 25 years and 5 years in contract manufacturing. The one thing which improved for us, and I focus a little bit more on the commodity, which we all familiar with, it's called titanium. We actually managed to solve our constraints, and we're in a position where we have inventory in different locations worldwide with our partner, as well as in the US. So we solved that, so we're available, and I'm not saying this lightly. This is not an easy undertaking, and it can change every day, as we all know, but knocking on wood, we managed that well, and so I can proudly say our titanium is covered. We are available, and that is a big portion of our business actually is related on that material.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because, obviously that has been a big concern over the past year or so. And so also, from the OEM perspective, knowing, a major supplier like Orchid has improved in that regard and progressed makes a big difference. So Tatiana, what about you? What challenges have gotten better for Exactech over the past year?
Well, for us on the titanium side, we have been working with our partners and having protected that supply for a long time. So we didn't struggle with it as much, although we still see the challenges coming. For us, I would say we've seen improvements on our contract manufacturing. Their lead times are compressing. They are catching up with their backlog. So a lot of those delays were caused by labor shortages. Ingo was talking about talent before. I think that's getting better, and they're coming up to improve capacities that are improving deliveries to us.
Great, thanks. So, again, as we look at what's been evolving and what's been going on over the past year, there still are, some of these weaknesses in the supply chain. So, Tatiana, if you had your magic wand, what would be the one item that you would like to see a more accelerated fix on?
I would like to see a permanent fix on the commodity side. So packaging materials, Tyvek, we're still struggling hand to mouth with some of those. There's high risk on that side. Titanium as I would say, was not that bad. We have different sources. But I would say on the packaging side, I would like to see that fixed.
Yeah, I think, a number of us have been struggling in that regard. Discussions with AdvaMed as well, on some of the packaging areas, and really, would really like to run our supply chains without that kink in the hose as far as not having sufficient packaging. So I think that's a great one that we're all sensitive to. Ingo, from your standpoint, if you had one wish, the magic wand, what would that be in your supply chain to accelerate and fix?
Yes, so I have that wish, and I'm actually working on it. So from my perspective and from our perspective, it is to improve the planning collaboration with our customers, to be better prepared for market demand and the never-ending changes. And get a better alignment. So to put this a little bit in perspective, I was actually lucky enough to have two major customer meetings over the last 4 weeks, where we had a kind of a workshop session where we talked to each other in a very open forum and showed our process, as well as had the customer talking about the market demand and the implications on their planning side, which I believe, if we can collaborate better and get a better feel for what is the true market demand together, we will be more successful versus placing a PO with a contract manufacturer and say, just ship me 500 and then 6 months later ship me another 500, doesn't provide that visibility. And these dialogues, and this comes a little bit from my background, being on the OEM side for that long, understanding that side very well, that's something I believe in will make a major difference also for all of us, because in the end, the goal is to help a patient to get better. And if we better aligned as a whole, including the hospitals, if you want to see end to end, I think we're all going to do better. And we probably waste less time on things like building inventory for no reason or changing things, without really knowing or not even discussing it. So I'm going to pause here, but that is my magic wand-wish, and I decided this year to push it a little bit. And again, I was lucky. We had two very successful meetings.
Great. And Scott, from your perspective?
Yeah, I love Ingo and Tatiana's answer, the collaboration, and I could certainly dive off into some of the specific commodity and product types that have been the most challenging for us. But I think if I had the magic wand for all of us as an industry, it might be something around being able to execute changes faster. I'm thinking about packaging and other types of items that we're all constrained on. Well, from a supply chain perspective, we can solve a lot of these problems tomorrow, but how do you get through the testing, the approvals that are required to implement those changes? Can be quite lengthy. And, I think just like Ingo said, collaboration might be the key to that, but it's not just going to be the OEMs and contract manufacturers. How do we collaborate with notified bodies and regulators who all are looking for different things in order to, speed that time to change? Because there are solutions out there. We've just got to figure out how to pull the trigger on them.
Very good. So moving to more of the tools being used by you all as the issues have come up, Tatiana, as you look at a traditional tool that you've been using in your strategies to develop a more resilient supply chain, what would be something that, has been in the toolbox a long time that you're using in this current environment?
So a tool that has been there that we're using more of, but it's not an easy tool to use because of what Scott just mentioned, difficulty to approve things. It's dual sourcing. So we're trying to build redundancy in our supply chain to minimize the risk. But of course, it's not easy because we have to go through many qualifications and validations and approvals. So if we could make those times shorter, it would be even easier. But and we're doing this a few different ways. So by diversifying where we get some commodities from, so sourcing parts from different parts of the world, so we're not impacted so much by geopolitical issues. We're also working with things that we make internally that are fast growing and critical for us, also working with contract manufacturing to make them for us. So we have that ability to respond if there's surge capacities. And just in general, diversifying the supply base to minimize the risk and tool source.
Good. Scott, what's your traditional tool that you've been using?
Well, the one we're working on, I would say strengthening the muscle on is MRP, using system-based MRP. I'm sure I'm not the only one on the call that's guilty of this, but too much planning by spreadsheets. Trying to, and our ratio, I'm sure some of your ratios are much higher than ours, but, 3 or 4 people trying to keep track of 5,000 SKUs and what's happening with supply and demand all in Excel. It's just, and that's an exaggeration, of course, slightly, but it's almost impossible. So trying to figure out how to use the systems that we've got in order to just get more efficient, more accurate, and better again. And that's one of the elements we're trying to do to limit our self-inflicted wounds in supply chain.
Great. So system-wide, greater usage of ERP rather than the proverbial Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So we do actually be able to manage all the complexity we have in the business. And then, Tatiana, the importance of dual sourcing, even getting greater priority, working collaboratively across the organization, make sure we can get the resources and taking into account geopolitical risk or regional risk. So, a couple great thoughts there. Ingo, from your perspective, what's your traditional tool you've been using more of?
They have been mentioned. I will have an additional one, but I want to just comment on what Scott said. I mean, one of our initiatives since my team and I started about 1.5 years ago is to harmonize our ERP systems to offset what Scott said, the Excel spreadsheet business, to have one source of truth. In my experience, you cannot underestimate that, because the more spreadsheets you do, the more confusion you potentially create, because there is there's opportunity for errors and misunderstanding. So the additional one I would like to mention is we actually invest in technology. And that is something probably you have seen historically in Europe a lot in high price markets, right? Where technology will help you. So if you change the way you do things, if you get robots to do your polishing, for example, or you get the additive, which a lot of us already know it's existent, right? But these are changes which will help in a very positive way to basically produce the right product, the right time, and with the right quality to be delivered to our joint customers, which means finally a hospital and a patient. So I think that is something I really believe wholeheartedly in, that technology and data and systems, of course, dual sourcing, these are all good points, but those will be probably game changers midterm.
And I think one of the key things as you're looking at this too is, right, a lot of the things we've been faced with over the past years, I don't think many people would have predicted, some of the global challenges that have come up from COVID to the Russia-Ukraine war onward. And likewise, I think, Scott, you were, humble in saying, hey, we've made mistakes. And, and some of this, though, is we are in territory that has not been charted before. So maybe, Ingo, starting with you, the world has changed in the past 3 years. What would be something new? What's something that, the light bulb has gone off and said, wow, I really need to do this differently now because of all these changes that have happened to, make Orchid more successful as going forward with a more resilient supply chain? What would be a new tool?
Yeah, so it's probably not that new. In theory, it's always existed, but I would call it the collaboration with our suppliers, for example, with our raw material suppliers or service providers. So we intensified the collaboration in terms of doing many more LTAs than we did before, just to be on the list, because I think all of us know, including the audience, that in today's world, you may be actually unlucky if you want to order something. Like 3 years ago, you could do spot quotes in the market and you get the best price. You only buy 3-4 companies and you're going to be very, very delighted that one is giving you the best price. That went away. It went to, in the steel world, it went to the mills are full already in 24. And if you haven't agreed to something today, you will not get a delivery. And that's not only for steel, that's also for other commodities. So we changed significantly how we operate with our key suppliers, how we collaborate, have very open dialogue about demand, and more than ever, actually, to secure the demand for our customers, agree to volumes, to have a priority and to be on the list to get a delivery. Again, the suppliers, if you don't have that agreement today, you don't get anything in 24. So that's how, sadly, how bad it's developed. And it's not just price, it's now also really you have to commit to something, otherwise they have plenty of opportunities, and the ones who do not commit many times are basically unlucky. Yeah.
So really, supplier relationships, collaboration matter, and the formality of having that agreement in place to prioritize capacity. Mm-hmm. So, Scott, from your perspective, new tool?
Yeah, well, new tools kind of interesting. Personally, I've been really fascinated by what you can do with AI, but I've only started to scratch the surface on actually using it in our supply chain. But it's very interesting. But the one that I do think, like Ingo said, not necessarily a new tool, but definitely I would say refocus on an old tool is building that flexibility in from the front end. We're a mid-sized manufacturer, and for many years, decades, our focus has been getting new products to market as fast as possible, innovation, things like that. And, the risks of, developing a product where a component or a coating is only available from, one supplier or even one site or even internally, one piece of a custom-made equipment. that limits you. And while supply chain folks for decades and certainly in the last several years have been talking about how to build that flexibility on the front end, sometimes the trade-off is made to, hey, you know what, time to market, cost, innovation, we're going to move forward. And then, in situations like we've been in, these unprecedented times, some of those are coming back to bite us. And I do think so now, and it's going to take a long time just due to product development life cycles. I think now that voice in your new product development teams of, guys, hey, let's point out that when we're talking about this particular product and the direction we're going, we're going to be sole sourced on this, and this. And I think just experiencing all the supply chain challenges and what it's meant to back orders and revenue and disappointed customers, I think now the whole business is listening to whereas before it's just an operations talking point. Now, when you point out, hey, we're going into another situation where we might be sole sourced, everybody understands the impact of what that can mean.
Yeah, that's a good paradigm shift that, there's more ownership across the organization, really, of the risk, especially as you launch precious new products that you want to succeed. And, and thinking about that, as suppliers that we have out on the call today, are there multiple locations the supplier would offer? Or do you have to do a dual source with two different companies? How do you make that make sense for, the relationship and the program that you're working on? So I think that's a good reinforcement of something that's changed. Tatiana, from your perspective, what's something that you would have that would be a new tool?
So a new tool for me, but not necessarily, it's been out there for a long time. I'm going to say scenario planning. So we're working on our IDP process, demand, capacity, long-term planning to incorporate those long-term scenario planning tools. So what ifs? We have demand scenarios, things that are changing around us, supply constraints. So playing with those, incorporating the technology and tools to be able to look forward and make decisions based on risk and different situations. So it goes back tying to what Scott was saying on the foundation, MRP basics, make sure that we have the right planning. And also what Ingo was saying, doing the right product at the right time. Because resources are constrained, we have to make the best out of them and anticipate what could happen if things shift.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I use a little bit, consistent with what you've mentioned and the teams, the panel here has looked at is the area of the packaging that you mentioned earlier, Tatiana, and, somewhat in there, the reality that chemicals matter. And I had never thought of that previously myself, but we see it, as, a year ago, and I hope I don't jinx us, we had a Finnish paper mill go out on strike, which was extensive and, impacted potentially labels on our products. Yep. We had an Eastman explosion in Tennessee that then impacted PET-G supply. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I had never heard of the Finnish mill before, and I didn't realize we had only one Eastman approved medical device entity in Tennessee. That was the only source for the industry. So we see that happening where, there's just other things that, you can take to the next level as far as your planning with others. And some of these things that you just didn't have on your radar screen that now are important. And that brings me to the next one, Tatiana, as far as a question is, as you looked at things and beyond operations, supply chain, the sourcing team, who's been most important for you to team up with as you develop a more resilient supply chain, as you look at the different challenges you're faced with? What other function?
Yeah, so many functions I could mention, but I think if I had to pick one at this point, I would mention the commercial and marketing organizations. We have to, the demand after the pandemic has been so volatile, and it's been so difficult to understand. Is this growth pent-up demand from the pandemic, or is it true market growth? What's happening? So partnering with them and them being close to our customers, it's allowing us to better predict what's going to happen, incorporate that into our forecasts and what if scenarios. So that's been critical. And then also being able to pass that information to our contractors, like Ingo was saying, the collaboration between the supplier and us, just to be able, if they can plan for what we need and we can pass that information, then we'll all win.
Thanks. So Scott, who's been your MVP cross-functional team member in developing a more resilient supply chain?
Oh, well, yeah, that'd be a tough one because it's been all hands on deck from so many groups. But I'd be torn between two groups. Our quality and regulatory teams are doing everything they can to build us the flexibility that I talked about earlier. And then, like Tatiana said, our commercial teams, they're having to get better at utilizing field inventory than they ever have before, and that's always been a task for them. But now it's something that they've got. It's just been exponentially more important for them to help us with, and it's. Of course, they don't want to do it, but they've been doing it anyway. So I'd probably have to, again, like Tatiana, say the commercial team is. Really, they've been the ones that have stepped out of what they would want to be doing to help with the overall supply chain.
Thanks. Ingo, who's your best buddy?
That supply chain is always something unexpected is happening, even if it's on you. I'm going to take it with some humor here. So for us, and in my mind, supply chain is about bringing it together, bringing all together. So the way we do that in our organization is we have a very, very sophisticated integrated business planning process. And that process, where we have monthly meetings and quarterly executive meetings, aligns actually everyone in the organization, from the manufacturing, regulatory, quality, commercial, of course, that's a key element also for us in our organization, to planning, procurement, CapEx, you name it, it's all included. We see demands, we see swings, we see where we have an issue, we see where we have to get more lean and better, which is a big initiative as well. We believe in lean, and we have a lot of initiatives about lean manufacturing. And to be honest, as a lean black belt myself, there's never a moment you never have to give up. You always have to continue finding more continuous improvements and have to think lean. And if you're in Japan, as we all know, the Japanese live it actually privately too, so they're fully acclimated to lean, even when they go on a train station and wouldn't do what we do. They don't show up 15 minutes early, they're 2 minutes, and then they jump in the train. They don't waste any time. So on that, and then on top of that, because that provides visibility to the entire organization, including finance, you name everybody. So bringing it together is the game, or it's the task, not the game, it's a plan, and it's what we're doing. Though we're all in the same meeting, we're all in the, look at the same situation, and we can make decisions quickly or action items. And then I come back to the collaboration. You will hear me saying that a lot, because I truly believe that the collaboration with the customer to understand the real market demand is more than ever of essence. And I'm saying this because from my experience, product mixes change, demands change. As I said earlier, hospital cases are now transferring into ambulance surgery centers, which is a complete different game for field inventory, as Scott mentioned that before. That will put some pressure out, right? And more than ever, I think it's important not to just say we're going to build some inventory somewhere, whether it's on the supplier side or on the customer side. It's actually meeting market and customer expectations in my mind. And that, again, I come back, customer collaboration is one of the biggest themes we have currently in our supply chain as well. So we get really engaged and understand each other, exchange data and talk about it, and make decisions jointly.
Yeah, and I think, Ingo, it leads to the next area too, and you mentioned it earlier. I mean, you've got some multiple perspectives on the industry, being at the OEM level, being at the supplier level. I mean, having that diverse background, because we have a number of different companies who are, in our panel today listening in. I mean, what guidance would you give, given that broad-based perspective that you have, that you've been touching base with the hospitals in your past in some of your positions. You've been at the OEM, you've been at the supplier. How does that change your perspective as you think about the challenge of a resilient supply chain today?
Yeah, it comes down to visibility and to trust each other and to, go together, feel like you are together in this. And it's not just a transactional relationship where you say, I give you a PO, deliver it, done, you get the next PO. But try to feel, I give you an example in my history. When I was on the OEM side at B. Braun, we had a lot of key suppliers because the company was growing very fast. So we would not be able to support a 20% growth years over year in some of the product areas back in the day. So we were really, really relying on contract manufacturers to help the company to grow from whatever, like 500 million to billions, right? In the end, and I think all of you have similar stories to share. So we started early to say our key suppliers are actually an extended workbench, and we consider them as part of our supply chain. Now, I know this may sound a little bit awkward, because if you're a buyer, you want to get the best price and the shortest lead time and all these things. But I can tell you based on my personal experience since you asked that if you do this collaboration and you mean it, and this doesn't mean for everyone, it's not a coffee company, but it's if you have a key product in the market and you have a key supplier, if we treat each other like we are together in this, it makes a big difference than just putting out terms, signing LOIs, giving a PO. Don't talk about the volumes. And there's so many changes in the market. As you said, I know very well the market we're going into when we now transfer a lot of surgeries into ambulance surgery centers. They are not prepared for certain functions a hospital has, instrument processing, whatever. That all puts up pressure on all of us to either get more sets out in the field because they have to have the set for the surgery, but it takes longer to reprocess and bring it back. I don't want to go too far off, but that's how I look at it. And that's why I think whenever we collaborate together and in a key mutual beneficial partnership and we make this attempt to kind of trust each other, right, for a moment, you will have better outcomes. I guarantee. I've seen this myself on the OEM side. As I said, I was very dependent on some suppliers. And I see it also with a few examples since I've joined the contract manufacturing world where we engage with customers actually from the supply chain together with our friends in commercial to make this, to really see all aspects of what we're trying to accommodate.
Thanks, Ingo. I appreciate your perspective, holistically across the industry. Tatiana, when you look at your experience, it's been pretty diverse. Sometimes the big multi-billion-dollar company, sometimes a somewhat smaller company. From your perspective, as you're at ExacTech now, what would you say, given those diverse perspectives of working at different companies, different cultures, how do you best navigate what we're faced with right now at ExacTech?
Yes, I'm going to piggyback on what Ingo was saying about collaboration. So coming from Zimmer Biomet, a big corporation that has a lot of leverage with suppliers, and now being a mid-sized company where you are struggling to get some capacity sometimes, and they have to prioritize your customers. That's where you have to really connect with your supplier and then partner with them to then provide visibility, as Ingo was saying, and work together through the challenges that we face. That's also when other options become important, as I was mentioning before, dual sourcing, because now you have to find different alternatives. But now being the smaller player where I don't have the 1-800 call Howard for help line, we are on our own. And it's partnership is more important.
Yeah, sometimes I think, we have to just kind of almost be like the banks and just give everyone a vice president title. So when they do call the suppliers, that you're dealing with a vice president at the bank, even if the guy just started a week ago out of college, that almost in supply chain, we need to do something creative like that. Just a reminder for the participants, if you do have Q&A, please feel free, to go ahead and introduce some questions to the panel. We'll take some time here as we're going through the discussion. I do have a question here just for the whole team as far as, more of the resiliency aspect as it affects our team members. And I'll move to Scott on that question. because I mean, it is a tough environment, right? We're still in this thing. We called it unprecedented. I don't know what we can call it now because, it just keeps continuing to a certain extent. Yeah, things have gotten better, but we're still kind of like those famous guys who would go on the high wire and not have a mattress below them or some sort of mat to save them. So I think when we look at our supply chains and such, it's still pretty rough. How do you keep your team, Scott, positively motivated, given the current challenging environment with some of these supply chain issues and inflationary issues, that our folks haven't had to face?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's tough. We've actually our parent company in their talent management had introduced. We all know IQ and EQ. They introduced a new one to me called AQ as in their formula for an ideal team member, and that stands for adversity quotient. And in these supply chain roles right now, that's important. But I think the traditional leadership techniques are important as always. They're probably more important than always. And in addition to those, I think the one thing that I've seen the most effective, and I think it's helped me personally, is just, reassurance of, look, guys, we realize this is a tough situation and we've just got to keep putting one step, we got to take it day at a time and putting one foot in front of the other. That's how we make progress, and just recognize those little milestones of progress, one step at a time along the way. And kind of remind everybody it's a marathon, not a sprint, and hopefully you can keep the mindset focused on continually making that improvement rather than looking at how far we might have to go, because although it's getting shorter, it still might be a long way.
Ingo?
So your question was, what's different?
Well, no, it's more the motivational aspect of, how do you keep your team, fired up, given the reality of, sometimes, you feel like, unfortunately, you come into the office, and if you're in supply chain or sourcing, it's almost a lose-lose, right? Here's a price increase due to inflation, and here's a shortage versus, 3 years ago, it wasn't a walk in the park, I think, as far as supply chain or sourcing, kind of challenges, but it's just a daunting kind of environment sometimes.
So from our perspective, we do a lot of things to overcome this. And you're right, supply chain, as we talked earlier, is a never-ending, exciting task. I mean, it's been for many of us for years. And it's very easy to get frustrated no matter at what place in supply chain you work. So what we have been doing, we focused on talent, and actually my group, I'm probably lucky. I got a very talented group, which has one thing in common. We understand we are in this together. We all have an OEM background, actually, which I think is helpful in contract manufacturing, that you have that view in supply chain in particular. We all have a lean thinking, continuous improvement, regardless what you talk about, even if it's things how I cut a PO or how I create a report out of my MRP system. Our goal is to bring teams together. So we are like bring it all together driven. To really ensure positive customer experience for sure, and operational outcomes. And with all of that, there's a great sense of urgency. And I know this sounds like phrases, but it's still very, very important if you think about your day-to-day, that your team members are aligned at one hand side, and on the other side have a certain level of agility or sense of urgency. I think all we do, it was said before, our goal is to be faster, to react faster, to find better ways to serve the market, right? So that's our goal. Outside of that, as a company, we do a couple of things which I think are noteworthy. We have what we call an Impact Academy. So we actually educate all our employees about the products they produce and how and for what procedures they are used for. So they build a relationship. If you think about, let's say, semiconductor manufacturers, they build microchips, they go in the phone or some computer. it's not much to associate with, right? I mean, you have a device and that's part of it, but we're talking about devices like hips, knees, shoulders, which help people to improve their life quality. And I think it is important, even if you're an operator in production, to understand and to be proud of what you're doing. I mean, that is something which has worked very well for us. So our commercial team does this, and it's been really, really appreciated. We feel like our employees identifies ourselves much more with what they do and what purpose is behind making people's life better than just coming in from 8 to 4 and work a job, or 8 to 5 and really don't care what it is. And then on the career path, we have programs where we allow people, we empower people. We want to have open discussions. We want to have I call it sometimes know your price communication. So we encourage and we don't discipline if someone has been empowered and does something wrong, as we all know. We all learn because of our mistakes. I think Scott said it initially, and I think back on my own career, I can't even count how many mistakes I made until I became who I am today, but it was all good. And if I would have fired all the time, I probably wouldn't have a job after 10 years, right? So it's like you have to make that experience, but you have to allow for it. And then our culture is problem solving. So we, supporting what Tatiana said, we need to get our lead times down. We need to find maybe more cost-effective way through lean, and not only through procurement of materials, but process to become more effective in our production. And we also, on the pricing side, probably find ways to limit these huge increases we all see in the market with inflation and material increases going on. So yeah, that's what we do. And I can speak for our organization. It has served us very well what we're doing here. So
thanks, Ingo. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because we did get a few questions. And so, Tatiana, I'm going to move to a specific thing to test your AQ, which I had never heard of before, Scott. So we'll test your adversity quotient here. And there's a couple coming in related to raw materials. And so one here is particularly, how do you really deal with, the longer term risks? So, for example, of titanium supply, where, there are limited suppliers, you have a geopolitical thing, but, are you looking beyond traditional boundaries? And you don't have to get into anything confidential. We don't want to violate anything, but how are you looking, or where are you looking as you think about things beyond traditional boundaries and with internal resources to look at, how do you address some of these raw material shortages, and particularly titanium?
So I think it's challenging some of the things that have limited us in the past, looking at regions that we had in the past kind of said no to. So just going back and evaluating that risk and those suppliers, and to open our options, right? So as I was saying, diversify the sources to minimize the risk, but doing so by looking at places that we had not looked before. And I'm going to just say, like, Taiwan, China, what's out there, like what can we change the mindset or evaluate reasons why these were not before done.
Thanks, Tatiana. Scott, would you like to add on that a little bit? I mean, how do you, make the business case for, alternative sourcing, get internal resources to support it, but it's hard to figure out, completely, where you'll be and when you'll be with some of these alternatives?
Yeah. That's a tough one. Again, it goes back to building flexibility, lots of focus on, R&D, testing from your R&D team to support bringing on second sources, then working through regulatory approvals, significant changes, notified body approvals, and things like that. Basically, we've set up a team that focuses just on, we call them transfers, just on those transfers. And right now, our whole business recognizes that addressing these supply chain issues are the number one priority in the business. So that's one of the fundamental leadership tools that I think is important, is having clear priorities and our business has made it clear this is the number one priority. So it is easy to get alignment between all the cross-functional groups that are needed to bring those on. But then, you get into the supply chain management and trying to predict the future about, geopolitical risks. We're a very cost-focused organization, and clearly we have a plant in China with supplier relationships there. But just like the question mentioned, is that has its risks and benefits as well. Everything's about a trade-off. So how do you mitigate that? And like Tatiana said, I mean, a lot of it comes down into dual sourcing, but where do you dual?
Yeah, and another question out here for feedback on is a greater amount of time and resources are needed to accomplish tasks in supply chain sourcing than what we used to have in the past, just to get the same results. So you're almost on that treadmill, right, where more energy is needed, but you're still, getting the same results. How do you figure out how to manage that extra load within your teams? So again, maybe a good HR perspective on there. Tatiana, what would you say as far as, the workloads maybe gone up 100%, doubles, whatever? How do you manage it?
So Ingo was mentioning before continuous improvement. So we have to work smarter and try to find better ways of doing things. So look at the process, the foundation, and try to make them simpler so we can open capacity from our teams to take on those extra loads. And while we work through that, because that also is an investment of time, then prioritize, help them identify the priorities, set common goals. So we're all working on things that are meaningful and driving to our purpose. So just helping them organize and on a track where they make the best use of their time, while also work in improvements to open time in the future.
Ingo, anything you would add?
Yeah, so the key is continuous improvement, but I would just phrase it very simplified. Work smarter than harder. What does that mean? Data is of essence. That's why we talked about ERP system data availability. We all use Power BI. Our goal is to put as much as we can in Power BI, almost real time, right? And so we can look at data rather quickly versus spending hours and days and creating a spreadsheet and understanding the result. We focus on creating standard Power BI reports, which gives us actually what we're looking for. And I mean, that has always been the case in my experience, that you have to have those data points, especially in supply chain, to make educated decisions. And also it will take away some frustration where people spend nights and days on spreadsheets. And trust me, I have been there too myself. I know exactly what that means. But if you get it delivered to you because you structured it that way, you automated it, you work actually smarter than harder. Everybody has more workload with less people. That's for many different reasons. And my advice is appreciate your team, make sure you understand when someone gets, to a point where it's too much, and how you can help each other. That's at least what we're doing. We are a smaller team in supply chain at Orchid, but we try to help each other out and actually still work very hard on IT solutions to get us information.
One thing I would just add too is I think we do have a value proposition within the organization right now to take advantage of, and not necessarily that we'll get a lot more resources, but as the organization looks to move forward, how do we make that business case? We've had some success at Zimmer Biomet, for example, that we added a packaging category leader where we had one in the past. We added a person in the sterilization outside supplier processing area where we had one in the past. Now, two isn't necessarily revolutionary. So I think going back to what a lot of the theme of what you've described here is that collaboration with suppliers and collaborations, with the commercial team and getting better organized in that regard, as well as the system type efficiencies that we need to drive, as Scott was touching on. What is the potential of AI and some of these other tools to take the clerical that's out of here and take the spreadsheet management out of here, I think are some of the things that we really need to take to that next level of execution. But we are nearly running out of time. Great panel discussion. Appreciate the questions that came as well. So I'm just going to do kind of a bullet round here and then pass it back to Carolyn, which is if you were to give one bit of advice from your lessons learned, what would it be as far as building more resiliency in supply chains? What's your golden nugget bullet item, Tatiana, that you would leave our audience with?
So I would say be prepared. There are options. We just went through a bunch of them. So explore them, take some risks, going after those options, diversify, collaborate with your suppliers. So just like be prepared for adversity because it's going to be there. It's going to continue.
Scott?
Yeah, I think I would, just given what I've lived through, while there's lots of opportunities, I think the number one for me would be execution and precision in planning. There's always going to be hiccups in your own plant with a machine down or a supplier that's supporting many of us have a hiccup or one of these things that's outside of all of our controls. Those things are always going to happen. We've got to be flexible. So planning is hard enough when things are going well. And I think just making sure that those systems and processes are rock solid and are executed well to again, like I've said many times, to help limit those self-inflicted wounds. So then all that's left is managing, the external factors.
Ingo, your final golden nugget?
Yeah, I would say in a nutshell, work together. Simple solutions may work the best for us, for all of us. Share data, trust each other, and take care of your team and yourself.
Great final words. With that, Carolyn, I'll turn it back to you to just bring us to conclusion.
Thank you so much. That was a really, really excellent conversation, and I appreciate you sharing your experience and your insight on the current supply chain environment. For those that are listening, I hope you were able to take away ideas on how to utilize some of the tools that they discussed and how to really work with your teams cross-disciplinary to problem solve and to really collaborate with your suppliers. So this webinar, it will be available on demand on the Bone Zone website if you'd like to access it again, or if you'd like to share it with your colleagues or your suppliers. And finally, I just want to say thank you to Orchid for sponsoring this webinar. You can learn more about Orchid at orchidortho.com. So thank you. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.